Hello and welcome back to All About Russia. My name's Andrew and today we'll be looking at one of the Caucasian ethnic groups, the Andi people. The Andi people, known in their native tongue as Guvernal, mainly reside in northwest Dagestan. They are a tiny community with, as of the 2010 census, registering just over 11,000 people across the whole of the Russian Federation. However, nearly all of these people lived in 9 villages found in the Bolsheviks district of Dagestan. Their language is called Kivanab-Mitsitli, which simply means the language of the Andi, and can be broken down into 2 dialects, Upper Nandi and Nizhny. The Andi language is similar to the Avar language. Both are found in the Avar-Andean branch of the Naxko-Dagestani link of the northwestern Caucasian family tree. For those of you who are interested, it sounds a little like this. In fact, the Andi language is so similar to the Avar language that some people have argued it's actually a dialect of the Avar language, and the Andean people are a sub-ethos of the Avar ethnic group. Due to the small numbers of the Andi people, they are considered one people and do not split off into different tribes or groups, and as such have no national symbols to speak of. The Andi are an ancient people, having inhabited their mountain home since at least 2000 BC. The first written mention of the Andi people actually comes from the Assyrians, all the way back in the 9th century BC, when their king, Sargon II, had a stone tablet inscribed commemorating his conquest of the Andiman people. The history of the Andi people does have a lot of black spots, parts of their history which we are not fully aware of what's happened. This is the case leading from this first mention up until the 5th century with the arrival of the Avars. From the 5th century AD onwards, the Andi people were subjugated by the Avars into the kingdom of Saria. Gradually, between the 5th and 12th centuries, Christianity began to spread amongst the Andi people, introduced by their Avar overlords. Many of the Andean people throughout the centuries began to assimilate and lose their identity, merging into the larger Avar ethnic group. Those who did not want to assimilate moved deeper into the mountains, founding what we know as the Andi lands today, centered around the main village, Andi. This Avar overlordship would last until the coming of the Mongols. With the arrival of the Mongol hordes in 1241, the Andi, among many other Caucasian ethnic groups, began paying tribute to the Mongols. This would last for about a century, and it wouldn't be until the late 14th century when the Andi people would stop paying tribute to the Mongols and start paying it to the Avars again. By the late 14th century, the Avars had managed to dislodge the Mongols and again assumed overlordship over the Andean people. Interestingly, at this point, Islam becomes known amongst the Andean people. Much like with Christianity, it had been introduced to them by the Avar people, who themselves had adopted it from the nations on their periphery, notably the Ottomans and the Persians. How exactly Islam spread amongst the Andean people we may never know. It may be the case, much like in other parts of the Caucasus, where it trickled down through the aristocracy. However, it may have been a much more recent conversion in the face of Russian aggression. Conflict over farming and grazing land with the nearby Bolsheviks had emerged after the Mongols had left, resulting in a tit-for-tat raiding lifestyle among the majority of the Andean people. Whilst the majority of this violence was internal to the Caucasus, occasionally aggression from outside powers would force the Andean people to defend themselves. By 1806, after hundreds of years of defending themselves from Persian and Ottoman aggression, the musket-armed Andeans were now facing a threat to the north, the Russians. The Caucasian Wars took a terrible blow on the Andean people. Those who were not slaughtered in the face of the Russian military forces were forced to flee either deep into the Caucasus Mountains or flee abroad to the Ottoman Empire. As we have seen with other ethnic groups, those that remained were suppressed by Russian forces. Their language was not allowed to be taught, and their culture was gradually phased out with a systematic approach to Russify them. This suppression came to a head with the 1917 October Revolution. The Andean people found themselves in a very peculiar situation. On the one hand, they could choose to join the Bolsheviks, who were gathering support across much of the old Tsarist Empire, and on the other hand, they could join the North Caucasian Mountain Republic, newly formed amongst Caucasian people groups. However, the Andes decided to do largely neither of these, and fought both groups intermittently until the 1930s. This in turn led to a complete suppression of their language and culture, even more so than had been under the Tsarist regime. Throughout the Soviet period, this suppression, as well as coupled with economic factors, caused thousands of Andeans to leave their native villages, many of them losing their language, heritage, or even their identity as Andean people. The state, furthermore, did not even recognise them as an ethnic group unto themselves, and simply classed them as another group of the Avars. In the late 1980s, with the introduction of Glasnost and Perestroika, the Andean people were allowed to legally teach their language once again. For decades, they had secretly been keeping their culture alive, teaching their children their language and traditions in secret. Now the Andean people had a real chance of keeping their culture alive, legally teaching their language and history to future generations. Outsiders call the Andean people Andi due to the name of their main village. During the Caucasian Wars of the 19th century, this saw a huge Russian defeat. This heritage was something they would relive in the 1990s. Invading fundamentalist Chechens, who were hoping to create a caliphate in the North Caucasian region, were not only denied entry to the Andean villages, but were actively opposed by the Andean people, something they were supported later by Russian federal troops. This brave defence and defiance in the face of fundamentalism endeared Vladimir Putin to the Andean people, and personally handed out several gifts as gratitude to the brave villagers. Today, peace reigns in the Andean villages, but they still face a grave threat. A falling population and dying culture means the Andean people must make a supreme effort to keep their way of life alive. The Andean way of life seems reminiscent of other Caucasian groups. Husbandry and farming are the main occupations, with many people also engaged in textiles. Whilst traditionally blood feuds are an issue in this part of the world, the Andean family unit is traditionally matrilineal, following the mother's side of the family and living in close-knit communities. Whilst most Andean people are Muslim, some still do practice their native faith, something that has survived for thousands of years. The native Andean faith has a pantheon of gods, with the supreme god being Siob. Many Andeans still make offerings to these gods at their most holy site, Mount Bahargan. The Andean people have some unique costumes, even amongst the people of the Caucasus. Women wear a distinctive headgear called a chukta, a crescent-shaped cap with down horns, whilst men wear a burqa. No, not a burqa, a burqa. A burqa is a cape which covers from the shoulder. They're often made of black or white wool and are constructed in 15 different stages. A burqa is a military piece of dress, and supposedly is so well constructed it can even stop bullets. Since the time of the Caucasian Wars, the burqa have been very popular by those looking for a military chic look. To conclude, the Andean people are a small but significant people in the Northern Caucasus, desperately trying to keep their fascinating way of life alive. Thank you for watching. My name's Andrew, and I hope you found this video interesting. Up next will be the Andeans. Пока!